The call was already connected when Tiffany said those words. She had no idea, but Miss Betty heard every syllable, every insult, every truth her daughter-in-law had hidden for 8 long years. That fat, useless old woman is here, again. Tiffany's voice was clear as a bell through the phone. There was no static, no interference. Just pure cruelty flowing directly into the ear of a 67-year-old woman who had raised her son alone. I'm embarrassed to introduce her to my friends, a maid, at my party, and she's my husband's mother. Miss Betty didn't move. She couldn't move. Her legs had turned to stone. Her heart was beating so hard she could feel it in her throat. But her eyes filled with tears that refused to fall. If it were up to me, that ignorant woman would never set foot in here. And in that moment, something broke inside her. It wasn't a noise, it wasn't a scream. It was something far worse. It was the silence of a woman who finally understood. That 8 years of fake smiles, of cold hugs, of excuses not to visit, of scornful glances when Charlie wasn't looking. It had all been real. But before we go on, you need to know how we got here. You need to meet Ms. Betty, and you need to understand why this story doesn't end the way you think it will. If at any point in your life you felt someone was pretending to like you, if you ever discovered that smiles were hiding contempt, then this story is for you. Stay until the end, because what happened after that call changed everyone's life forever. Elizabeth Betty Santos was born in 1958 in a small town in rural USA. Her father was a carpenter. Her mother cleaned houses for the wealthy families in town. They never had much, but they never lacked for love. She was the youngest of 6 children, the only one who learned to read and write, the only one who dreamed of something beyond the cornfields that surrounded her town. But the dreams of a poor woman in the USA of the 1960s didn't have much room to grow. By the age of 14, Betty was already working as a maid in the big city. She sent every penny she earned back to her family. She slept in a tiny room in the back of her employer's house. She ate leftovers. She wore the old clothes they gave her. But she never lost her dignity. And she never lost hope that one day things would be different. At 21, she met John Carlos. He was a taxi driver, dark-haired like her. He smiled with his whole body, and he looked at her like she was the only woman in the world. They got married 6 months later. They had nothing, literally nothing. They rented a room in a tenement building, shared a bathroom with 4 other families. Betty continued cleaning houses. John worked double shifts, but they were happy. And when Charlie was born in 1983, Betty knew that all the sacrifice had been worth it. Charlie, her only son, her reason for living. She watched him sleep in the makeshift crib that John had made from recycled wood and promised in silence that this child would have a better life, that this child would study, that this child would be someone. And she kept her promise. When Charlie was 7 years old, John died, a traffic accident, a drunk driver, a life taken in seconds. Betty was 28 years old, a young son, no formal education, and absolutely no one to help her. But she didn't give up. She started cleaning houses for more families. She worked from 5 in the morning until 10 at night. Her hands cracked from the harsh soap. Her back ached constantly, but every night and when Charlie was asleep, she studied the books he brought home from school. She learned math to help him with his homework. She learned history to answer his questions. She learned to sew so he would never go to school with torn clothes. And Charlie learned something too. He learned that his mother was the strongest woman in the world. The years passed. Charlie grew up. He was intelligent, he was dedicated, he was everything Betty had dreamed of. He got a scholarship to a private school, then another scholarship to college. He studied law. He graduated with honors. He got a job at one of the best law firms in the city. And Betty kept cleaning houses, not because Charlie didn't want to help her. He sent her money every month. He offered her a better house. He offered to pay someone to help her. But she always said the same thing. "Honey, I'm fine. Save that money for your future." What Charlie didn't know was that his mother had saved every penny he sent her for 20 years. She never touched a single dollar. It was all in a bank account he didn't even know existed. And there was something else, something that John had left her before he died. 3 plots of land on the outskirts of the city that his father had inherited. Land that no one wanted in the 1980s. Land that now, 40 years later, was worth millions. Betty never sold them, never mentioned them. She simply waited. But waited for what? Maybe she waited for Charlie to need her someday. Maybe she waited for an emergency. Maybe she simply didn't know what to do with so much money. Or maybe, and this is the saddest truth, maybe she knew that money couldn't buy the one thing she really wanted, the love of her family. Charlie got married at 34 years old. Tiffany Martins, daughter of a businessman, educated in the best schools, dressed in the best brands, and absolutely convinced that she was superior to everyone around her. Betty met her 3 months before the wedding. Charlie took her to the small apartment where his mother still lived. It was a humble but clean place. There were flowers in the window. There were photos of Charlie on every wall. And there was a smell of home-cooked food that filled every corner. "Mom, I want you to meet someone." Betty came out of the kitchen, drying her hands on her apron. She saw the woman next to her son, blonde, thin, elegant, with a purse that probably cost more than everything in that apartment. And she saw something else. She saw the way Tiffany looked around, the way she wrinkled her nose almost imperceptibly, the way her eyes lingered on the cement floor, on the peeling walls, on the moisture-stained ceiling, as it was only a second. But Betty saw it, and she understood everything. "Nice to meet you, Mrs. Santos." Tiffany extended her hand with a perfectly rehearsed smile. "Charlie has told me so much about you." "The pleasure is mine, honey." Betty took her hand. It was cold, soft, the hand of someone who had never washed a dish in her life. During dinner, Tiffany barely touched her food. Claiming she was on a diet, she said that home-cooked meals didn't agree with her. Said a lot of things that sounded polite. But Miss Betty understood perfectly. "This food isn't worthy of me." But she said nothing, just smiled, nodded, kept serving coffee and cornbread like she hadn't noticed a thing. Because Miss Betty had learned something in her 67 years of life. She'd learned that some battles just aren't worth fighting. And she'd learned that a son's love is more important than a mother's pride. The wedding was held in a ballroom that Miss Betty could never have imagined. Crystal chandeliers, imported flowers, waiters in tuxedos, 500 guests, and she, sitting at a table in the back, in a dress she'd bought with 3 months of savings. Charlie found her in the crowd, hugged her, whispered in her ear, "Thanks, Mom, for everything. I wouldn't be here without you." And those words were enough. They were enough to withstand the stares of the guests, who were clearly wondering who this overweight, poorly dressed woman was. They were enough to ignore Tiffany's mother, who didn't even acknowledge her existence. They were enough to smile in the photos, even though nobody included her in the important ones. They were enough. Or so she thought. During the first year of their marriage, Charlie visited her every week. He brought flowers, told her about his job, asked if she needed anything. The second year, the visits became monthly. The third year, bi-monthly. The fourth year, when little Pete was born. Everything changed. Pete, her grandson. The reason her heart kept beating. She saw him for the first time when he was 3 days old. Tiffany was exhausted. Charlie was at work. And the baby wouldn't stop crying. "Let me hold him, honey." Tiffany looked at her suspiciously, but she was too tired to argue. Miss Betty took the baby in her arms, cradled him, and started singing a lullaby that her mother had sung to her more than 60 years ago. And Pete stopped crying in that moment. Miss Betty saw something in Tiffany's eyes. It wasn't gratitude. It was something darker. It was resentment, as if it bothered her that this old, fat woman could soothe her son when she couldn't. The following years were a mix of small moments of joy and constant reminders that she didn't belong in that world. Pete's birthday parties, where they always sat her at the farthest table. Christmases, where she arrived with handmade gifts and watched Tiffany's family children receive tablets and video games. Family gatherings, where no one spoke to her except her son and her grandson. But she kept going, because every time Pete saw her, his eyes lit up. He ran to her, yelling, "Grandma! Grandma!" He hugged her with all the strength of his little arms, and he told her things that no one else did. "Grandma, I love you. Grandma, you're the best. Grandma, I want to go to your house." And Tiffany hated every second of it. What you're feeling now, that mix of rage and helplessness, hold on to it, because what comes next is much worse and much better. The day everything changed was December 8th, 2024, Pete's 8th birthday. Miss Betty had received the invitation 2 weeks earlier. It arrived in the mail. An elegant envelope with gold lettering. She opened it with trembling hands. She was excited. Finally, she'd been included in something important, but when she read the invitation, something wasn't right. "We have the pleasure of inviting you to celebrate Pete's 8th birthday." It didn't say anything else. It didn't say her name, just Ms. on the invitations she'd seen from other family events of Tiffany's. They always put the full name of the guest. Mr. So-and-so. Mrs. What's her name? But for her, just Ms., as if she didn't have a name, as if she didn't deserve one. Miss Betty put the invitation in a drawer. She didn't say anything to Charlie. Didn't want to cause him problems. Didn't want him to argue with his wife, but that night, alone in her small apartment, she cried for the first time in many years, and wondered if it was worth it to keep trying on the day of the party. Miss Betty woke up early. She bathed carefully, put on her best dress, the same one she'd worn to Charlie's wedding 8 years ago. It was a little tighter now, but it was still her favorite. She looked at herself in the mirror. She saw an old woman, overweight, wrinkles on her face and gray in her hair, but she also saw a woman of dignity, a woman who had raised a son alone, a woman who had never asked anything from anyone, a woman who deserved respect, even if no one gave it to her. She picked up the gift she had prepared for Pete, a hand-knitted blanket. It had taken her 3 months to finish. Every stitch was made with love. Each color had been chosen thinking about what Pete liked. Blue like the sky, green like the trees, yellow like the sun. She knew Pete would receive dozens of expensive gifts, video games, electronic toys, things that cost hundreds of dollars, but she also knew that her blanket would be different because her blanket had something that money can't buy: love. She arrived at Tiffany's mansion at 3 in the afternoon. It was a huge house, white walls, perfect gardens, luxury cars parked in the driveway, waiters dressed in black greeting the guests. Miss Betty got out of the taxi. The driver looked at her in confusion. He probably thought she had the wrong address, that this humble woman couldn't belong in such a place. But she walked towards the entrance, with her head held high. Upon arriving at the door, a waiter stopped her. "Your name, please." "Elizabeth Santos." The waiter checked the list, frowned, checked again. "I'm sorry, I don't find you on the guest list." Miss Betty felt her heart stop. No, it couldn't be. She had received the invitation. She had it at home. They couldn't have forgotten her. "I'm Charlie's mother, Pete's grandmother." The waiter looked at her uncomfortably. It was clear he didn't know what to do. "Let me check with the lady of the house." And he disappeared inside the mansion. Miss Betty stood there, with her gift in her hands. The other guests passed by her without looking. Some whispered. Others simply ignored her. 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes. Finally, the waiter returned. "You can come in, but the lady of the house requests that you use the service entrance." The service entrance, like the employees, like the servants. Miss Betty wanted to turn around. She wanted to go home, to forget the party ever happened. But then, she thought of Peter, his smile, his hugs, the way he looked at her, like she was the most important person in the world, and she walked toward the service entrance because a grandson's love is worth more than a grandmother's pride. She entered the party through the kitchen. The staff looked at her curiously. One of the cooks, a dark-haired woman in her 50s, smiled at her knowingly. "You must be the boy's grandma." "Yes, he adores you, talks about you all the time." Those words were like medicine for her wounded heart. "Thank you, honey." She left the kitchen and walked into the garden, where the party was in full swing. It was everything she had imagined, and more. Perfect decorations, tables overflowing with food, a bouncy castle, a clown, a magician, and dozens of kids, running and laughing, and there, in the middle of it all, was Peter. She saw him before he saw her. He was surrounded by other kids, but seemed distracted. He kept looking toward the door, every few seconds, searching for someone, searching for her, and when his eyes finally met hers, his face lit up, like the sun after a storm. "Grandma!" He ran to her, colliding with her legs with all the force of an 8-year-old. He hugged her, like his life depended on it. "Grandma, you came! I thought you weren't coming." "How could I not come, honey? It's your birthday." Peter looked up. His eyes were shining with tears. "Mom said maybe you couldn't come, that you were sick." Ms. Betty felt a chill run down her spine. Tiffany had told her own son that she wouldn't be there. She had tried to keep them apart, but she said nothing, just smiled. "I'm here, honey, and I brought you something very special." She showed him the package, wrapped in colorful paper. Peter took it with reverence, as if he knew what was inside was more valuable than any electronic toy. "Can I open it now?" "Of course you can." He unwrapped the paper carefully. He pulled out the blanket. He touched it with his hands. He held it to his face. "It smells like your house, Grandma." Miss Betty felt her heart burst with love. "I made it for you, so that when you're cold or scared, you'll feel me close by." Peter hugged her again, tighter this time. "It's the best gift, Grandma, the best of all." And in that moment, Miss Betty knew it had all been worth it. The humiliations, the exclusions, the service entrances, everything. Because that boy's love was real, and that was more valuable than any treasure. But her moment of happiness didn't last long. because Tiffany had seen them. And she was walking toward them with that fake smile, with those cold eyes, with that voice that sounded kind, but cut like a knife. "Miss Betty, how nice of you to make it." "Tiffany, thank you for inviting me." The two women looked at each other, one with hatred, disguised as courtesy, the other with pain, disguised as strength. "Peter, why don't you go play with your friends? Your grandma and I are going to chat." "But Mom, I want to be with Grandma." "Later, honey. Now the adults need to talk." Peter looked at his grandmother with worry. Miss Betty smiled at him. "Go on, honey. I'll come find you later." The boy left, dragging his feet, looking back every few steps. When they were finally alone, Tiffany's mask fell. "I don't understand why you keep coming to these events. You clearly don't belong here." Miss Betty looked her directly in the eyes. "I come because my grandson loves me and I love him." Tiffany let out a humorless laugh. "Peter's a child. He doesn't know what he wants when he grows up. He'll understand that there are certain people who just don't fit in his world. And you think I'm one of those people. I don't think it, I know it." Miss Betty felt something break inside her, but she didn't cry, she didn't scream, she didn't defend herself. She just said one thing. "Maybe you're right, honey. Maybe I don't belong in your world, but I belong in my son's and my grandson's hearts. And you can never take that away from me." Tiffany opened her mouth to reply, but at that moment, Charlie appeared. "Mom, so good to see you. And Tiffany, what are you two talking about?" Tiffany's transformation was instantaneous. Her face softened, her voice became sweet, her eyes lost their coldness. "Nothing, honey. I was just welcoming your mom." Charlie smiled. He hugged his mother. "Come on, Mom. I want to introduce you to some colleagues." And he led her away, but Miss Betty saw something that Charlie didn't see. She saw the way Tiffany looked at them as they walked away, and in that look, there was something that froze her blood. There was pure hate. What Miss Betty didn't know was that this hate was about to explode, and it would be her own grandson who would show her the truth in a way that no one expected. But that comes later. The party continued for 3 more hours. Miss Betty was seated at a table, far away from the main action, alone, with only a waiter, who occasionally offered her something to drink from her spot. She could see her son, mingling with the important guests. She could see Tiffany, being the perfect hostess. She could see Peter, running and playing like any 8-year-old, but no one came to talk to her. No one asked her name. No one seemed to notice that she existed. She was invisible, a ghost, at a party full of life. And maybe that would have been it. Maybe she would have gone home that night with a broken but intact heart. Maybe she would have continued to pretend that everything was okay for the rest of her life. But fate had other plans. It was almost 7 o'clock. The party was winding down. Guests were starting to leave. Miss Betty decided it was time to say goodbye to her grandson and go home. She got up from her lonely table. She walked toward the house, looking for Peter. She found him in his room. He was sitting on the bed, playing with his phone, or rather, with his mother's phone that he had borrowed. "Grandma!" Peter jumped off the bed and ran to her. "I thought you had left without saying goodbye." "Never, honey. I would never leave without giving you a hug." She hugged him tightly. She felt his little arms squeeze around her neck. "Grandma, I want to go to your house. When your mom and dad say you can, I'll be waiting for you." Peter looked at her with those huge, expressive eyes. "Mom never says I can." "I know, honey, I know." They stayed there, hugging, for a few seconds that seemed like forever, and then Peter did something. that changed everything. "Grandma, I want you to see something that my new toy does." He took his mother's phone and started tapping the screen with the natural skill of children of his generation. "Look, it has a calling app. I can call anyone I want to." "That's great, honey. I'm gonna call you." Little Peter tapped the screen. He scrolled through his contacts. He found his grandma's number and he pressed call. But something went wrong. Somewhere in the mansion, Miss Betty's phone started to ring. And at the same time, in another part of the mansion, Tiffany's voice started to speak. Peter had accidentally bridged a call. A call that should never have existed. A call that changed everything. Ms. Betty reached into her purse for her phone. She pulled it out. She looked at the screen. Incoming call. She pressed answer and heard something she would never forget. "That fat, useless old woman is here again." It was Tiffany's voice, young, clear, scornful, full of poison. Miss Betty froze. She looked at Peter. The child didn't seem to understand what was happening. He kept tapping the phone screen, oblivious to the tragedy unfolding. "I'm embarrassed to introduce her to my friends. Look at how she's dressed. She looks like the cleaning lady. And she's my husband's mother." Each word was a knife, each sentence a blow. "If it were up to me, that ignorant woman would never set foot in this house, but Charlie is such a pushover. He doesn't have the guts to tell his mother she doesn't belong in our family." Miss Betty felt tears start to fall, but she kept listening because she needed to know. She needed to know the whole truth. The worst part is Peter. The kid adores her. I don't understand why. What can he see in that fat old lady that he can't see in me? A laugh, cold, cruel. Anyway, I just have to put up with her for a few more hours. After today, I'm going to make sure she never comes back to this house. Silence. And then the line went dead. Miss Betty lowered the phone. Her hands were trembling. Her heart was shattered. But her face showed something it hadn't shown in 8 years. Determination. "Grandma, are you crying?" Peter was looking at her with worried eyes. She quickly wiped away the tears. "It's nothing, sweetie. Just got something in my eye." But Peter wasn't stupid. He was 8 years old, but he could sense when something was wrong. It was something Mommy said. Like, "Honey, the phone. I accidentally connected your phone with Mommy's. I think you heard something." Miss Betty looked at him. This child, her grandson, was smarter than anyone gave him credit for. "Don't worry about it, honey." But then Miss Betty noticed something. There was an icon blinking on Tiffany's phone screen, and an icon that said recording in progress. Peter had recorded everything, accidentally, without knowing what he was doing. He had recorded every word of hatred that his mother had uttered. And that recording was about to destroy everything Tiffany had built. The truth has a curious way of coming to light. Sometimes it takes years, sometimes decades, but always it comes out. And when it does, nothing is ever the same. But that you'll see in what's coming. Don't go anywhere. What would you do in this moment if you were in Miss Betty's shoes? If you had heard everything she heard? If you held in your hands the proof of 8 years of lies and contempt? Think about that as this story continues, because the decision she made will surprise you. Miss Betty stood motionless in her grandson's room. Tiffany's phone was still in Peter's hands. The recording was still there, blinking, waiting. A millionaire could hire lawyers, could destroy lives with that recording, could avenge every humiliation received. But Ms. Betty wasn't a millionaire. At least that's what everyone believed. "Grandma, are you okay?" Peter's voice brought her back to reality. "Yes, honey, I'm fine." But she wasn't fine. Her heart was broken into 1,000 pieces, and each piece bled with the memory of those words. Fat, useless, old woman. Ignorant woman. She doesn't belong in our family. She had heard insults her entire life. She had been discriminated against because of the color of her skin, because of her weight, because of her lack of education, because of her poverty. But never had it hurt so much as now. Because this was coming from her son's family. From the woman who slept next to Charlie every night. From the mother of her only grandson. This wasn't a stranger on the street. This was treachery. Miss Betty took a deep breath. She made a decision. "Honey, I need you to give me that phone for a minute." Peter handed it over without questioning. She looked at the screen. The recording was still there. 12 minutes and 43 seconds of pure truth. Her fingers trembled over the delete button. Part of her wanted to erase it all. Forget what she had heard. Move on as if nothing had happened. Keep the peace. Protect her son from a painful truth. But another part of her, another part knew that the truth always finds its way, and that 8 years of lies were enough. She pressed save, and then she pressed send. The recording arrived on Charlie's phone in less than a second, along with a text message. "Honey, listen to this before you talk to me. Peter recorded it by accident. It's time you knew the truth." Ms. Betty handed the phone back to her grandson. "Thank you, honey." "For what, Grandma?" "For existing." She hugged him one last time and left the room. What happened in the next 30 minutes is something the guests at that party would remember for the rest of their lives. Charlie was in the garden saying goodbye to the last of the guests when his phone vibrated. He saw the message from his mother. He frowned. What could be so important that it couldn't wait? He opened the audio file and pressed play. The first few seconds were confusing. Background noise. His mother's voice saying something. Peter's voice. And then, "That fat, useless old woman is here again." Charlie felt his blood run cold. He knew that voice. It was his wife's voice. But it wasn't the sweet, loving voice he knew. It was something completely different. "I'm embarrassed to introduce her to my friends. Look at how she's dressed. She looks like the cleaning lady. And she's my husband's mother." Charlie had to lean on a table to keep from falling. No, it couldn't be. Tiffany couldn't have said that. Tiffany loved his mother. Tiffany had always been respectful. Tiffany. If it were up to me, that ignorant woman would never set foot in this house. But Charlie is such a pushover. He doesn't have the guts to tell his mother she doesn't belong in our family. The words hit him like a hammer. Pushover. His wife had called him a pushover. His wife had insulted his mother. His wife had been faking it for 8 years. Charlie felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Rage. A deep, primal, uncontrollable rage. The recording continued. The worst part is Charlie. The kid adores her. I don't understand why. What does he see in that fat old woman that he can't see in me? And that was what broke him. It wasn't just his mother anymore. It was his son. Tiffany was jealous of a 67-year-old grandmother because her own son loved her. Charlie tucked the phone back into his pocket and walked towards the house. What he didn't know was... Miss Betty was standing at the edge of the patio. She'd been watching him the whole time. She had seen his face change as he listened to the recording. She'd seen the rage in his eyes, and she had felt something she hadn't felt in years. Pride. Pride in her son. Because finally, Charlie was going to face the truth. Charlie found Tiffany in the living room. She was seeing off the last of her friends, smiling, hugging, promising to get together soon for lunch. The perfect hostess, the perfect wife, the perfect liar. Tiffany! His voice sounded different, harsher, colder. Tiffany turned around. She saw something in her husband's eyes she'd never seen before. Charlie, what's wrong? Are you okay? I need to talk to you. Now, in private. Tiffany's friends exchanged nervous glances. Of course, honey. Just let me say goodbye. Now, Tiffany. His tone left no room for argument. The friends quickly said their goodbyes and almost ran out the door. And then they were alone. Charlie took the phone out of his pocket. He put it on the table and pressed play. For the first few seconds, Tiffany didn't understand what she was hearing. And then she heard her own voice. That useless fat old woman is here again. Her face went pale. Charlie, I can explain. Keep listening. I'm embarrassed to introduce her to my friends. Look at how she's dressed. She looks like a maid. Charlie. Keep listening. If it were up to me, that ignorant woman would never set foot in here. But Charlie is too weak. The recording ended. The silence that followed was deafening. Tiffany looked at her husband. She looked at the door. She looked at the phone. And then she did something Charlie didn't expect. She attacked. That's taken out of context. I was joking with my friend. You know how women are. We say things we don't mean. You called my mother a fat, useless old woman. It was a joke. You called my mother an ignorant woman. Charlie, you're exaggerating. You called me weak. Tiffany opened her mouth and closed it. She had no answer for that. 8 years, Tiffany. 8 years pretending you liked my mother. 8 years of lies. 8 years excluding her from family photos. 8 years seating her at the furthest table. 8 years making her enter through the service entrance. Charlie's voice cracked. Today, you made her enter through the service entrance. The woman who raised me alone. The woman who washed clothes for 40 years so I could go to school. The woman who never asked me for anything. Charlie, my mother is worth more than your entire family combined. Worth more than this entire house. Worth more than all the money in the world. Tears started to fall down Charlie's face. And I was so blind I didn't see it. I was so cowardly I never defended her. I was so stupid I let you treat her like garbage in my own house. That's the most painful truth of all. It's not that Tiffany was cruel. It's that Charlie had allowed it. For 8 years, he had chosen comfort over justice. For 8 years, he had chosen silence over truth. For 8 years, he had chosen his wife over his mother. And now, finally, he was paying the price. What you're feeling now, that knot in your stomach, that rage in your chest, save it, because what comes next is even more intense. And the person who's going to destroy Tiffany isn't Charlie. It's someone much more unexpected. The argument between Charlie and Tiffany continued for over an hour. Shouting, tears, accusations. Tiffany tried every tactic possible. First, She denied everything, said the recording was manipulated, that someone had edited it to make her look bad. When that didn't work, she tried to minimize it, said all daughters-in-law say things like that about their mothers-in-law, that it was normal, that Charlie was exaggerating. When that also didn't work, she tried to blame Miss Betty, said she had always been distant, that she'd never tried to integrate into the family, that it was impossible to like someone so different. And when Charlie asked her what she meant by different, Tiffany made the biggest mistake of her life. You know, she's not like us. Like us. Charlie, you know what I mean. Say it. She's black. Charlie, and fat and poor and uneducated. How do you expect me to introduce her to my friends? Charlie looked at her as if he was seeing her for the first time. And maybe he was. The first time he was seeing the real Tiffany, without masks, without acting, just pure cruelty. I'm black too, Tiffany. You're different. How am I different? You're successful. You have money. You're educated. I'm the son of that black, fat, poor, and uneducated woman you despise so much. Tiffany opened her mouth. No sound came out. And everything I have, everything I am, is thanks to her. Thanks to her hands cracked from soap. Thanks to her sleepless nights. Thanks to her unconditional love. Charlie, it's over. Tiffany, what? This marriage is over. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious in my life. Tiffany felt the world collapsing around her. But Charlie Jr. Think of Charlie Jr. I am thinking of Charlie Jr. That's exactly why I'm leaving. What do you mean? I want my son to grow up knowing that his grandmother is a hero, not an embarrassment. I want him to learn that the color of skin doesn't determine a person's worth. I want him to be a better man than I have been. Charlie turned to leave, and then he saw her, his mother, standing in the doorway, with tears in her eyes, but also with something else, with peace. Mom, honey. The two looked at each other. 8 years of distance disappeared in a second. Charlie ran to her. He hugged her as he hadn't hugged her since he was a child. He cried on her shoulder as he hadn't cried in decades. Forgive me, Mom. Forgive me for not defending you. Forgive me for being so blind. Forgive me for everything. Miss Betty stroked his head. There's nothing to forgive, honey. You're my son, and I love you. But there's something else I need to tell you. Charlie raised his head. What, Mom? Miss Betty smiled. There's something I never told you. Something your father left me before he died. What is it? And then Miss Betty told the truth. The truth about the 3 plots of land. The truth about the money she'd saved for 20 years. The truth about an inheritance worth millions. Charlie listened in silence. Tiffany, still in the living room, also listened. And her face, it went from disbelief to horror. Horror. Because she'd realized something. For 8 years, she'd treated a millionaire like garbage. For 8 years, she'd looked down on a woman who could buy her house 10 times over. For 8 years, she'd made the biggest mistake of her life. And now, it was too late to fix it. Mom, why didn't you ever tell me? Betty looked at him with infinite love. Because I wanted to know if you loved me for who I am, not for what I have. And now, I know, but she looked towards Tiffany. Now I know exactly who loves me and who doesn't. Tiffany took a step forward. Miss Betty, I I didn't know. Betty raised her hand, stopping her. No, you knew exactly what you were doing. You knew I was your husband's mother. You knew I was your son's grandmother. And you decided to treat me like trash anyway. But the money doesn't change who I am. It doesn't change who you were for 8 years. It doesn't change the words you said today. Betty walked closer to her. And it doesn't change. What's going to happen now? What's going to happen now? Betty smiled, a knowing smile. You're going to lose everything. But the person who hurt Tiffany the most wasn't Betty. It wasn't Charlie. It was someone who had been listening to everything. From the stairs. Someone, 8 years old. Someone who loved his grandmother more than anything in the world. And someone who held the proof of it all in his hands. Peter walked down the stairs slowly. His face was wet with tears. But in his hands, he carried something. His mother's phone, with the recording, still saved, and with something else. Something no one expected. I recorded it too, Mom. When you yelled at Grandma at the party, before you sent me to play. I recorded everything. Tiffany felt her knees buckle. There wasn't just one recording. There were two, and both were in the hands of an 8-year-old boy who had just lost all respect for his mother. What follows is the total destruction of Tiffany and the reconstruction of a family. But that is coming in the rest of this story. Stay tuned. The silence that followed Peter's words was the most intense that Mansion had experienced in its 20 years of existence. Tiffany looked at her son, her own son, with those recordings in his hands, with that expression of disappointment on his face, with those tears falling down his cheeks. Peter, give me that phone. No. Peter, I'm talking to you. Give me the phone now. No. It was the first time Peter had ever said no to his mother, the first time he had defied her authority, the first time he had looked at her without respect. And Tiffany felt it, like a punch to the gut. I heard everything, Mom. I heard what you said about Grandma, and I didn't like it. Peter, you don't understand. Adults sometimes say things that... You said she was fat and old and useless. You said she was an ignorant woman. You said horrible things, Peter. And Grandma has always been good to me. She always gave me things made with her hands. She always hugged me when I was scared. She always loved me. Peter walked over to Betty. He took her hand. His grandmother's hand was rough, full of calluses, the hands of someone who had worked her entire life. Grandma is the best person I know. And you treated her badly, and that's not right. Charlie looked at his son with infinite pride. At 8 years old, Peter understood something that many adults never understand, that the value of a person isn't in their appearance, isn't in their money, isn't in their education, it's in their heart. Charlie knelt down next to his son. Peter, I'm so proud of you. Dad, let's go live with Grandma now. Yes, honey. We're going to live with Grandma. Tiffany took a step forward. Charlie, you can't do this. You can't take my son, your son, our son, Tiffany. And he just decided where he wants to be. He's not old enough to make those decisions. He's old enough to know the difference between right and wrong, something that you, apparently, never learned. The words hit like a whip. Tiffany felt everything collapsing. Her marriage, her family, her perfect life, everything had been destroyed in a single night. And all because of a phone call. No, that wasn't true. Everything had been destroyed by her own words, by her own contempt, by her own cruelty. This story is reaching its most important point. If it's moving something inside you, if you feel that this is more than just a simple story, then I need you to do something. Go to that super thanks button down there. It's not just money. It's telling the universe that stories like this deserve to be told, that people like Ms. Betty deserve to be seen, that dignity matters more than money. One click, that's all it takes. The following days were a whirlwind. Charlie hired a divorce lawyer, one of the best in the country, a former college buddy, who owed him several favors. The process was quick and brutal. Tiffany tried to fight. She tried to keep the house. She tried to keep custody of Peter. She tried to keep everything she could, but there was a problem. The recordings, 2 recordings, that clearly showed her racism, her classism, her cruelty, and a prenuptial agreement that she herself had signed 8 years ago. An agreement that said that, in case of divorce, due to the fault of one of the parties, the guilty party would lose all rights to the common property. Tiffany didn't remember it. She had signed that agreement, thinking that she would never be the guilty party of anything. But now, the recordings proved otherwise. The judge looked at the evidence, listened to the testimonies, saw the proof, and made a decision. Full custody of Peter for Charlie. Supervised visits for Tiffany. The house remained with Charlie. Tiffany could only take her personal belongings. And one more thing, a restraining order from Miss Betty. Tiffany could not approach within 100 yards of her former mother-in-law for harassment and psychological abuse. When she left the courthouse, Tiffany had nothing. She had no house. She had no money. She had no son. She had no husband. She only had the consequences of 8 years of cruelty and a lesson she would never forget. Some people think that karma doesn't exist, that bad people can do whatever they want without consequences, that money and status protect you from everything. But the truth is different. Karma exists, and sometimes justice speaks through the mouth of an 8-year-old child. While Tiffany was losing everything, something beautiful was blossoming in Miss Betty's small apartment. Charlie and Peter had moved in with her. At first, it was tough. The apartment was small, barely 2 bedrooms, no air conditioning, no pool, none of the luxuries Peter was used to. But it had something Tiffany's mansion never had. Love. True love. Unconditional love. Peter slept in his grandma's room, in a small bed Charlie had bought him, right by the window overlooking the tiny garden where Miss Betty grew her flowers. Every night, Miss Betty would tell him stories before bed. Stories of her childhood in the rural USA, stories of her husband John, stories of Charlie as a little boy, stories no one else could tell. And Peter would listen with shining eyes. "Grandma, tell me another one." "It's late, honey. School tomorrow. Just one more. Please?" And Miss Betty always gave in. Because there's no grandma in the world who can resist those eyes. The months passed. Charlie became the man his mother had raised him to be, hard-working, humble, grateful. He no longer wore $5,000 suits. He no longer drove luxury cars. He no longer lived in a mansion. But he was happy. For the first time in 8 years. He was genuinely happy. Mom, forgive me for abandoning you. You didn't abandon me, honey. You followed your path. That's what children do. But I left you alone. I let her treat you badly. I didn't defend you. Miss Betty took his hand. You were a good man in a bad situation. You loved your wife. You wanted your marriage to work. It's not your fault she wasn't who she seemed to be. I should have seen it sooner. Sometimes we don't see what we don't want to see, honey. It's human. Charlie hugged her. Thank you for not giving up on me. I'll never give up on you. You're my son, and I love you. And in that hug, 8 years of distance vanished forever. But this story has an even more beautiful ending, because there's something I haven't told you yet, something that changed everyone's lives. Remember the 3 plots of land that John had left Miss Betty? Those plots worth millions. Those plots she never sold? Well, the time had come to do something with them. A year after the divorce, Miss Betty made a decision. She sold one of the plots, just one, for $4,800,000. And with that money, she did something no one expected. She bought an abandoned building downtown, an old, dilapidated, forgotten building, and she transformed it into something magnificent, a home for abandoned seniors, a place where people like her, older people, poor people, people who had been discarded by their families, could live with dignity. She called it John's house, in honor of her husband, in honor of the man who had left her those plots 40 years ago, in honor of the love that never died. John's house opened its doors on a Saturday in March. There were journalists, there were cameras, there were politicians wanting to take photos, but Miss Betty ignored it all. Only one thing mattered. The 20 seniors who walked in that day, 20 people who had no one, 20 people who had been abandoned by their families, 20 people who now had a home. Elizabeth Betty Santos, 68 years old, founder of John's House, personally attended to each and every one of them. She showed them their rooms. She introduced them to the staff. She promised them they would never be alone again. And when the last senior was settled in, Miss Betty sat down in the home's garden. Peter sat next to her. "Grandma, why did you do this?" "Because I know what it's like to feel invisible, honey. I know what it's like to be treated like you don't matter, and I want these people to know that they do matter. But we could have kept all the money. You could have bought a huge mansion. You could have traveled the world." Miss Betty smiled. "Money doesn't buy what I want, honey. What do you want, Grandma? I want to know that when I leave this world, he left something good behind. I want to know that those people will have a place to be happy. I want to know that my life served for something more than just washing clothes." Peter hugged her. "Your life served for everything, Grandma. You raised Dad, and Dad raised me, and now you're taking care of all these people. You're the best person in the world." Miss Betty felt her eyes fill with tears, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of joy, because finally, after 68 years of life, someone saw her, not as an old woman, not as a fat woman, not as an ignorant woman, but as what she truly was, a heroine. If you've made it this far, I have something to ask you, and it's not for me. It's for all the Miss Bettys of the world, the invisible grandmothers, the forgotten mothers, the women who work in silence, without asking for anything in return. Your comment can be their voice. Write something, anything. The name of someone who deserves to be seen. A similar story. Or just the word, thank you. Do it now, before you forget. 3 years have passed since that night at the birthday party. 3 years since the recording that changed everything. 3 years since Tiffany lost everything. And what happened to each of them? Let's start with Tiffany. After the divorce, Tiffany moved back in with her parents. It was humiliating. At 38 years old, she was back in the house where she grew up, without a job, without money, without a future. Her friends abandoned her one by one. No one wanted to be associated with the woman who had treated her mother-in-law like trash. No one wanted to be seen with someone whose racism had been publicly exposed. She tried to get a job, but her reputation preceded her. In every interview, someone mentioned the recordings. In every opportunity, someone remembered what she had said. Fat, useless old woman, ignorant woman. Those words haunted her. They would haunt her for the rest of her life, not as an external punishment, but as a constant reminder of who she had chosen to be. Eventually, Tiffany found work as a receptionist at a dental clinic. She earned a fraction of what she used to spend on clothes in a single month. But it was something. And slowly, very slowly, she started to change. Not because she was a good person, but because she had no other choice. The supervised visits with Peter continued. At first, they were tense. Peter barely spoke to her. He looked at her with those eyes that she remembered full of love, but that were now full of distrust. But with time, something began to change. Tiffany started to apologize, not with grand gestures, not with expensive gifts, simply with honest words. "I'm sorry, Charlie's son. I was a terrible person. I treated your grandma badly, and that was so wrong. Why did you do it? Because I was a horrible person who thought she was better than everyone else because she had money and education. But I was wrong. Your grandma is worth more than all the people I know." Charlie's son looked at her for a long moment, and then said something Tiffany would never forget. "Grandma says, everyone deserves a second chance, even you." Tears streamed down Tiffany's face, not tears of self-pity, tears of genuine remorse. "Thank you, honey. I'm going to try to be better." And although the relationship would never be perfect, it was a start, a new beginning. Charlie continued working as a lawyer, but no longer at the same law firm as before. He opened his own office, an office specializing in defending people who couldn't afford expensive lawyers, the elderly being scammed by their families, maids being exploited by their employers, vulnerable people that no one else wanted to defend. He didn't earn as much money as before, but he slept peacefully at night. He knew he was doing something good with his life, and that was worth more than any paycheck. He remarried 3 years later to a woman very different from Tiffany. Lucy was a nurse, brunette, from a humble background. She had grown up in a rural area, and she loved Miss Betty as if she were her own mother. When Charlie took her to meet his mom, Lucy spent 4 hours in the kitchen learning to make Miss Betty's cornbread. Not because she wanted to impress her, but because she genuinely wanted to connect with her, and Miss Betty knew it immediately. "This one's the real deal, son. This one's a keeper." Charlie's son is 11 years old now. He lives between 2 homes, most of the time with his father and his grandmother, some weekends with his mother. He's a different child than he was before. I'm more humble, more empathetic, more aware. He values the simple things. a hug from his grandmother, a home-cooked meal, a walk in the park, and always defends those who can't defend themselves. At school, when someone bullies another child, Charlie's son is the first to intervene, not with violence, with words. Words he learned from his grandmother. Treating someone badly doesn't make you better. It makes you worse. And if you keep doing it, one day you're going to lose everything you love. The teachers say Charlie's son is a natural leader, a child with a heart of gold. And when they ask him who he admires most in the world, he always gives the same answer. My grandma, because she taught me that what matters isn't what you have, but who you are. And Miss Betty. Miss Betty is 70 years old now. Her hair is completely white. Her hands are more wrinkled than ever. Her body aches on cold mornings. But her spirit is more alive than ever. Betty's place has grown. What started as a home for 20 elderly people now houses 60. There's a visitor program for students. There are crafts workshops. There's a garden where the residents grow their own vegetables, and Miss Betty is still there, every day, visiting each resident, learning their stories, making sure no one feels invisible because she knows what it's like to be invisible and doesn't want anyone else to feel that. One day, a journalist went to interview her for a documentary about aging in the USA. He asked her many things about her life, about Betty's place, about her philosophy. But the question that made her think the most was the last one. Miss Betty, if you could say something to all the older people who feel forgotten, what would you say? Miss Betty looked at the camera. Her eyes shone with a wisdom that only comes from living 70 years of struggles and triumphs. I would tell them that their life matters, that their stories matter, that every wrinkle on their face is proof that they survived things that others can't even imagine. She paused. I would tell them not to let anyone make them feel useless, not to let anyone make them feel invisible, not to let anyone take away their dignity. Another pause. And I'd tell them something it took me 67 years to learn. The people who look down on you don't define who you are. The people who love you do. The journalist had tears in his eyes. And when that documentary aired, millions of people cried along with him. Because Miss Betty's story wasn't just her story. It was the story of all the forgotten mothers, all the invisible grandmothers, all the women who work in silence without asking for anything in return. It was the story of human dignity and of how, sometimes, karma uses the mouth of an 8-year-old to bring justice. If this story moved you at all, I need you to do one more thing. Think of someone you may have forgotten, someone you may have treated as invisible. A mother, a grandmother, an aunt, a neighbor. Someone who helped you when you needed it and whom you never thanked enough. Now take your phone and call them, not tomorrow, not next week. Now, tell them you love them. Tell them they matter. Tell them you see them, because you never know how much time you have left to do it. And when you regret not having done it, it will be too late. This story is over, but yours continues. What are you going to do with it?